So thanks very much for having me. I thought it was very interesting, this idea of a perspective taking workshop. And no, I'm not going to ICPS or whatever it's called. Basically, I'm just here for this because I find it really, really intriguing. So I'm going to present data from three places, so for two places actually, Glasgow University and Aston University, where I was before. There will be data on the neurocognitive mechanisms of explicit visuospatial perspective taking. We heard a lot about implicit perspective taking. I will be more on the explicit part of visuospatial perspective taking. Yeah? So, and this is a good example, basically. I had been hoping, like Caroline, a little bit, that previous speakers would have introduced it a little bit better, more generally, but guys, what are we up to? Anyway, so this is, people have different views on the world, okay? Defined by the two telescopes here, basically, and we converse on that. So this is a quite sailing boat. It's like, wait, I got to turn the telescope. So what do we learn from this example? First of all, know what the other can perceive, track their perspectives. Yeah? So what's commonly referred to as level 1 perspective taking, and a lot of the tasks this morning, I would personally think, can be resolved with level 1 perspective taking or tracking another's perspective rather than really putting yourself into the other person's shoes. So something that was coming through in some of the talks. But what else do we know from this example? It's actually that we can sometimes make a physical effort to align ourselves with one another, basically. And this is also sometimes something that we seem to share with some of our other species, like apes and ravens. It's been shown on some of the slides. So even ravens jump around obstacles to align viewpoints with a human. Those are only hand-raised ravens. I should add to that. So there is a physical element to that. But the lazy species that we are, humans, we seem to have developed this capacity to just do it mentally. Yeah, just cut out the physical effort and just do it mentally. And that seems to be more uniquely human. But the jury's still out on that one. So I think Thomas Solo's group are still trying very hard to find evidence for that. But anything I've read over the past few years seems to indicate, nope, chimps are not very good at that. So, okay, but if you can do a mental effort, so we have this mental capacity. So what is it actually? This is why I made this connection here, because so if a physical effort allows you to do that, then maybe this mental effort could still be tied, linked with this physical effort, may originate, have developed, evolved even from this physical effort that we're doing. Okay, and just in terms of the mechanism that we could assume for perspective tracking versus perspective taking, this is not new at all. Basically, others have proposed that, for instance, for tracking another's perspective, so for instance, what is visible from the other's perspective or not, we use a line of sight mechanisms where we infer the other person's line of sight, and either it's basically interrupted, occluded basically, or it is not. So it's easy to make a judgment that a flower is visible from the other's perspective, whereas the paper bag here is not, it's occluded. So that's very simple and gets you there very quickly, but what is difficult or impossible to do with this line of sight mechanisms is to judge in which direction the flower is from the other's point of view. So how does it appear to the other person from their point of view? So for instance, in the simplest form, is it to the left or to the right of the tree from their point of view? Line of sight mechanism can't give you that, so you have to do something else. And again, others have previously, Michelon and Zaks very prominently, that you rotate yourself. You put yourself quite literally or mentally into the other's shoes, and you rotate the self into their viewpoint and then make the judgment from that imagined viewpoint, whether it's left or right. I should already add, basically, an alternative to that is basically you can also turn the whole world towards you, so turn it into an object rotation task. So it would be an alternative, theoretically, an alternative mechanism to that, to get to that. But the default mechanism has been proposed that it's a mental rotation of the self. Now, what we asked is like, what is the self that you're rotating? Is it something very abstract, like a left, right? That you're just rotating, or abstract frame of reference? Or what is it actually that we are actually rotating into the other's viewpoint and perspective? Has it anything to do with the body schema? Has it anything to do with our representation of the body, which we thought was quite likely, because if it has evolved from physical alignment? Yeah. So there's this connection back to a few slides back. Basically, making a physical effort also gets you there. So we use those standard perspective taking task, explicit one. We have to make left-right judgments. Think somebody was asking me where I'm still using the Guns N' Roses. I think it was Steven. Yeah, here's the Guns N' Roses, the original one, few years back now. So you have to make a judgment: is the flower left or right of the gun? Various angular disparities. Yeah, so that previously have been shown. The higher the angular disparity, the longer it takes you. And people have linked it with the mental effort you have to do to transition through all those angles. Okay, the new manipulation to this task was that we manipulated the posture of the participant. Okay, and we did that to actually test our hypothesis that body knowledge has something to do with basically making these level 2 left-right judgments from the other's perspective. So the participant, before every trial, they saw an image like this one. So either they remained sitting straight, which we call neutral, or they turned their body anti-clockwise, or they turned it clockwise. And in relation to this stimulus here, clockwise rotation is congruent or anticipates, and the Surtees and Iannavalli called it consistent. So whichever way you want to label it, it already sort of anticipates the mental direction of rotation. Whereas in this example, anti-clockwise is incongruent or inconsistent. Of course, if the avatar would sit on the other side of the table, the reverse would be true. So our prediction was very straightforward. A congruent posture should speed you up. An incongruent posture should slow you down if this process is really tied to the body schema, to your body representations. And we indeed found this posture effect. So where a congruent posture, the yellow line, is fast, consistently fastest, apart from the lowest angle, which is not very surprising. And discuss that as well if you like it after the actual talk. Then the neutral one is in the middle, and the incongruent one is the slowest. And this has been now replicated by Andy and Ian, apart from other people. So from Muto et al. Recently also showed the replication of that. And by ourselves in various experiments. So this is a very robust effect, one of the strongest effects I've seen in response time data in my own. Okay, so it's very fairly reliable. And then we did some variations on that to understand a little bit more on that. And interestingly enough, if you have an empty chair and your task is to imagine yourself sitting in that empty chair and make the left-right decision task, you use the same mechanism. So we find the self-posture congruence effect as we did with an avatar. So it seems that this process of putting yourself in someone else's shoes is not necessarily only social. It also ties in with spatial reasoning. Yeah, and it's quite interesting that there's an abundance of literature on spatial updating. Yeah, where that is very strongly overlapping with perspective taking, or to large extents, basically. And this was an attempt to tie it in. So it's the same embodied self-rotation that you do, as it seems, with an empty chair as with another person. But if you compare the two experiments, you're slower if there's an empty chair. So you're faster if there's another person. So we're still social beings to some extent. Then in another experiment, we also varied the posture element of the avatar with your own. I found an element of resonance. So it's important to stress here that this deliberate mental self-rotation, deliberate embodied rotation to the other's viewpoint is not something that automatic. It doesn't tie in with automatic resonance. It's a deliberate process. But in that experiment, we varied the posture of the avatar. There was an element of resonance, but towards the end of the mental self-rotation. So it's a bit a complicated story. So we do find elements of automatic resonance, but this embodied mental self-rotation is very distinct from that. Then we also compared it to object rotation. It was another reason why we use the empty chair. So we have a non-social element and to have a fair test to compare the two. So we changed the perspective taking task to an object rotation task. So the objects on the table here, the gun and the rose, had to be aligned with the colored blocks. Most participants prefer to rotate the objects towards the colored blocks and to make a mismatch decision. The details are not that relevant. The important thing is that we see an increase with angular disparity, so how far away the objects are from the colored blocks, similar to the perspective taking task. But what disappears is the posture congruence effect. Yeah. So if you see the green line is a congruent posture, it's not different at all from the neutral, or the blue line is a congruent, and it's actually numerically even slower than the incongruent one. So the posture congruence effect that we saw here is completely gone. So we have a way now to distinguish between mechanisms of object rotation versus mental self-rotation using this sort of posture manipulation, for instance. And it will be interesting to see also what the neurocorrelate distinctions are, difference in neural substrates. Okay, so this is a manipulation. I would like to add, before going more into the distinction level 1, level 2, I'd like to add that we replicated basically these effects also in a Chinese sample. So the across cultures, there are differences. Chinese females are super fast perspective takers compared to Western females who are a little bit slower. But in essence, this embodied mental self-rotation also goes across cultures, because cultural themes have occurred here, so it would be quite interesting to talk about it. I have the data somewhere on some slides further back. And now back to level 1 versus level 2 perspective taking, or perspective taking versus perspective tracking, as we prefer to call it. So embodied simulation versus line of sight. Can we find some evidence for that? So we changed our task a little bit, had an occluder in the middle, and with very similar stimuli, we could turn it into a visible occluded task. So this is an example for an occluded trial, whereas a left-right task. And we included our posture manipulation, only clockwise, anti-clockwise. We left out the neutral one. And we predicted that this posture manipulation now would only affect the left-right judgments as we've seen before, but not the level 1 line of judgments that are based on a line of sight mechanism. So, and this is the results we found. As we predicted, we replicated the left-right in the left-right task. So that's the pink symbol here. So the green and the blue. We replicated the effect of angular disparity as well as the posture congruence effect. Whereas for the visibility judgments, both lines are flat with angle, and there's no posture congruence effect. So you can do these visibility judgments from anywhere. It doesn't matter where the other person sits, whereas it matters a lot for the left-right judgments where the other person sits. So the effort increases significantly the further away they are. Yeah. And the way you are sitting, your posture contributes to left-right judgments, but not for these visibility judgments. Okay. So this is and we also found some cultural differences on the visibility judgments level 1. So if you're really interested, I can show you the data at some point over the next 2 days. But in the next step, we wanted to understand what are the neural substrates, especially of level 2 perspective taking, but also in contrast to level 1. And we used our task basically and used MEG. So Hong Fan Wang was a postdoc on the grant, and he looked at the oscillatory networks of the 2 tasks. And for visibility judgments, we did not find any effects that were stronger for perspective tracking than for perspective taking. Yeah, so we had to compare to baseline. And we found a strong involvement of frontal eye fields, which replicates previous findings to some extent. And the most important oscillations we found for both tasks were theta oscillations. So for left-right decisions, we found theta oscillations to localize to the right temporal parietal junction, and there to the posterior part. Yeah. Whereas the anterior part, as Caroline was also saying, could be more involved in general attentional processing, whereas the posterior part has been linked more to social processing. And this is basically these effects are stronger for level 2 versus level 1, and it's a accumulation of various contrasts. So the angular disparity effect and the posture congruence converge in the temporal parietal junction. So this is a conjunction analysis that's yielded that. Okay, that was very interesting, and what we thought it was a little bit too good to be true in a way. So we didn't. It's just a correlational finding at the end of the day, similar to fMRI with MEG. You see networks and you measure neural activity directly, but still at the end of the day, is it really causally involved in behavior? So we zapped it with TMS, so 2 pulses. And what we were able to do, we were able to modulate the embodiment effect, the posture congruence effect. We did not modulate the angular disparity. Yeah, so that's quite interesting. So we have dissociation. So targeting the right TPJ, the posterior part in particular, seems to basically target embodied elements of processing, not the general transformation process as such. And we were able to replicate the involvement of right TPJ, moving from Glasgow to Aston, so different MEG scanner, different philosophy. So for the geeks here, basically, so from magnetometers to planar gradiometers. So it's not that we were able to bias it in any way in terms of our pipeline. We found almost the identical MNI coordinates in theta in the right TPJ. And what we also found is that with anterior cingulate and lateral prefrontal cortex, typically areas associated with executive function, exert top-down influences onto the TPJ. We used Granger causality for that. And this causality, top-down, is in lower frequencies in the theta range, peaking in the theta range here. So we get an idea of how the network is actually, how the brain as a network works together to resolve this sort of putting yourself into someone else's shoes by using your own body knowledge, if you like, your own body schema. And we found also coupling using TPJ as a seed, also found social networks, yeah? So increased coupling with social networks and decreased coupling with the visual stream, almost insinuating that the TPJ is also switching from an external stimulus-driven mode to a more internal transformation mode. So I have some evidence for that as well. And this is a TMS experiment I wanted to show you because it's not only important to show that the right TPJ is an important hub in the network, but we also wanted to show that theta is an important code in the network. Yeah. So the oscillations, that it's theta that really drives it basically. So we again targeted those coordinates we had from MEG. But this time we didn't use interference to pulses, so we didn't interfere with processing, but we entrained the right TPJ either in theta or in alpha frequency. So either 6 pulses per second or 10 pulses per second just before the stimulus came up. So we know from other people's research that the echo persists for up to 3 cycles into the processing of the stimulus. And what we did found, what we predicted is theta is good for you. For your perspective taking, alpha not so good, because increased alpha is also often inhibitory. And this is what we found. So here at 160 degrees angular disparity, it is a negative effect because it's with active stimulation, you're faster than sham. Okay? Whereas with alpha, it's the other way around. The reverse is true at 60 degrees, which we can talk about, but in the interest of time, I'm going to gloss over a little bit. But the important conclusion is basically, so the right TPJ is not only the important brain network hub, but also that theta are indeed sort of the oscillations that drive it. So that it's a code of the network, as it seems, so they're causally involved. Again, we were influencing mainly the posture effect, not so much the angular disparity effect. And in another study using a nodal direct current stimulation together with Andrew Martin at the University of Kent, we were also modulating the posture congruence effect, not so much angular disparity. So it seems that the TPJ is more involved in the embodied elements of processing, whereas potentially, together with the executive networks, the top-down influences showed you on the previous slide, might be involved in conducting the actual transformation of the self into the other perspective. So maybe to sum up so far, because I would like to present you a little bit of the new paradigm. Have you shown me any colors already?
So I can show it in 1 minute.
It's like, okay, this is, yeah. I don't know, you're in my peripheral vision. I'm not sure if I'm ignoring it or not. I'm taking it still. That's fine. So, sum up so far, in terms of the mechanisms that we want to discuss as part of this workshop. So it is on our agenda. So what do we know about mechanisms? So perspective tracking is different from perspective taking. And we have to be very mindful how tasks that we give participants are actually solved. Yeah, so we have to be, can they get away with perspective tracking? Yeah, and they will do it. So they will always minimize their effort. So because it's very different from perspective taking. It develops earlier, but it can also be culturally modulated. We have some evidence for that. Appears to be undisturbed in autism and seems to be shared with other species, whereas perspective taking seems to be based on an embodied simulation of a mental rotation. It's very different from object rotation. develops later than level 1, culturally modulated as well, but in different ways, affected in autism. And there's a link between level 2 and mentalizing. We're going to get to that in a second, how the link might actually look like. So DPJ, as I said, it's an important hub. Theta is an important code. But some of the remaining questions that we are trying to address now is what are the distinct overlapping neural oscillatory substrates for object rotation? So we don't know that. We know quite a bit about self-rotation now and how it ties in with perspective taking, where basically you can put yourself into another viewpoint, empty chair. You can put yourself into another's body, or you can put yourself into another's mind. So there are different levels of complexity, which we will maybe more of you would like to discuss with us. So, but we don't know very much about object rotation yet in terms of the substrates and the oscillations involved. And now the second one is what exactly is the link between level 2 perspective taking and belief reasoning. And now I would like to show you our new product we just got published in Cognition. It's the seeing believing task. I don't have it on the slides, but this is how we call it. You need to coin it somehow. Yeah. And we asked the question is another's perspective. So imagining another person's perspective is the same as imagining their true belief. And we built our paradigm up in such a way that their perspective was identical to their true belief. And this is how the task goes. So at the beginning of each trial, avatar here, sitting just in front of the participants, so participant and other person and other are aligned, looking at an object, and could be either a rabbit or a toy locomotive on the table. Then, while they are away, belief reasoning, false belief versus true belief. So either the object is swapped on the table, so rabbit to locomotive, or it's not, so remains the same. This manipulation swap results in a false belief of the other, whereas remain the same, it's a true belief of the other. And then, when they come back, so the bucket, it's reminiscent of Antonio Hamilton's paradigm and other paradigms that have been used in developmental research, basically where a panda bear under a bucket, maybe some of you might remember that task. So it's occluded, and the other person can come either back at 0 degrees angular disparity as before, or now at the side, so 90 degrees angular disparity. And that was quite important to induce this element of perspective taking. Yeah, so we have an angular disparity between the self and the other, because it's also quite often a confound in belief reasoning tasks that there's a, well done, person. So there's an element of basically a confound how the egocentric perspective and knowledge overlaps with that of the other. So here you want to have a clear manipulation that disentangles that, because, for instance, so let's take the rabbit. So it wasn't swapped. From this perspective here, you would see it from the side, whereas here we would see it from the front. And that's what the participants had to answer. We asked them one of 2 questions. So it's like, what will they actually see? Perspective judgment. If the bucket is lifted, what will they actually see? So what will be their perspective? Yeah. Or what will they expect to see? Yeah. So what is their belief about what is underneath the bucket? And then they responded first with a spacebar press to measure our response times, and then they chose which comes closest to the percept the other, so the character here basically would have from that perspective, or what belief they would have from where they are sitting now. Yeah? So, for instance, with the false belief condition, what will they expect to see? It would still be sort of responses like rabbit, number 1, yeah, because they have a false belief. Whereas on the true belief condition, they would respond correctly, sort of rabbit, and will be identical with what they had to respond to their perspective. I haven't presented this yet, so it's the first time I'm presenting this data really at a conference. So I need to get a little bit my head around how to present it a little bit better, because the important thing is, under true belief conditions and perspective, their responses are identical. They don't differ. Yeah. So in both cases, you have to press 1 here. So they don't differ. Now our question was, do they still differ in terms of the processing? So if perspectives, explicit perspective taking is still somehow different from belief reasoning, then we would see a difference between true beliefs and perspectives, despite identical responses, despite identical content, representation content, if you like, but not necessarily representational format. And yeah, so this was Rachel Green's PhD. She's just passed the Viva. Congratulations to her. And essentially, this is what we observed. At 90 degrees angular disparity, consistently, we had 3 replications of this. And in the meantime, we have a few more. Consistently observed this response time difference here, basically, where perspectives are significantly faster compared to true beliefs. Just a reality check. True beliefs are faster than false beliefs. But that's the interesting bit is for true beliefs versus perspectives. And despite responding with the same button press, despite the same content, we see consistently a reliable difference in the response times. So basically, it's a bit something that I would like to discuss with you. Basically, what exactly the difference could be. So what we proposed in the paper was that in alignment with minimal versus full-blown theory of mind, could be that perspective judgments in this particular task are resolved with minimal theory of mind and might be more a relational processing format compared to beliefs, even true beliefs that have to be actually really converted into a propositional format. So it's one of the possible explanations, but it's debatable and more experiments have to be carried out to actually show that. So it's something to put into the discussion there. And I can see already Andy's really, well, maybe you're trying to remember the situation in the pub with Matthias Schwartz when was telling you about his task and maybe you can't retrieve that memory.
I said it would look exactly like this. Sure.
No, you didn't. Another did Matthias. So basically, this is just thanking to collaborators and funders and you as the audience. So thank you very much. Any aspects? Yeah, Caroline.
The last study, which is lovely.
Yeah.
What I can see, 1 and 2 of the questions they were asked, were they asked that in a blocked format or was it random?
It was completely random.
So, and on a given trial, I think it probably is quite crucial how long they have to process the question before they have to make.
So basically, they see the question at the same time. So it's actually shown on top of the screen. So when the character comes back, you see the question alongside with the stimulus configuration.
So that's when you see where they've moved to, if they've moved, and what you're being asked to judge.
Yeah.
And do you see any kind of practice effects as they go through the presumably blocks of trials?
Yeah, the presumably blocks of trials. It's because it was an online experiment, so it was pre-registered and 3 online experiments. This is why we pre-registered it because we didn't know where it would work about pandemic. Eh? So and we did 2 practice sessions because it was online. So we had 2 blocks of 8 practice trials, and it was a bit boring for them basically. But at the second, by the end of the second block, we had a bimodal distribution. Either they got it, and then they were really good in terms of accuracy, and then their response times actually were quite plateau. So we looked a little bit at that. They were quite, but you got more outliers on the later blocks because they got bored and they got a bit tired. But the average. So there was more variability maybe, but it was not a general trend that they're getting slower. So we try to keep it to a minimum a little bit. Was there another question or part of your question?
I think, yeah, I was just trying to explore the extent to which blocking the question might influence what you found, but if it was purely random, then we don't know.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see what would happen if you completely block it, whether it would persist or not. Well, the jury's out on that. It's basically it's one of the things that we would like to do in terms of seeing whether there's really a difference in format. But what you need to keep in mind is basically for the belief reasoning judgments, you have to first put yourself. If they're at 90 degrees, you have to first do perspective taking. So the question was, do you have any added processing to that? And consistency, see this added processing. So this is why this added processing could be an additional step to convert it from a relational to a propositional format. But that has implications, for instance. Yeah. So for instance, if this is really true, then you have this propositional format that is very good at allowing you further logical conclusions, further inferences. Then further inferential judgment, like how surprised is Kim, the character, how surprised is she, might be faster, paradoxically, after a belief judgments compared to perspective judgments, where you have to do this conversion step first. So that's one of the things we will be looking at, for instance. But blocking it might also shed potential light on that. Basically, if it doesn't change at all, basically, then could well be that it's actually really sort of a shift that you just can't practice it. You just need to do it.
Yeah, it'd be very interesting.
I don't know who was first. So basically,
Do you want to go first?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah, I had a question. You distinguish between perspective tracking and perspective taking, mainly level 1, level 2. And I remember, from what I remember, there was a study investigating the perspective taking in young children, and found that if children had to represent all will be perceived as objects, not in terms of left, right location, but in terms of on which color it will appear, depending on the different filters, which will make it perceived as blue or red. Children are able to resolve the task like at early ages. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering, while listening to you, would you consider this kind of maybe level 2 visuospatial perspective taking as perspective taking as an embodied processes, which is alternative and etc., or as a third type of perspective taking?
Well, third type, I wouldn't say third type. I would concede that under certain circumstances, basically you might use a line of sight mechanism, but reach an end product that could be considered as level 2, because you still might imagine how the world is represented. So I wouldn't necessarily exclude that. Just as a default, and it was quite provocative to basically put it out there and say, like, okay, we have to be very, very mindful, like you're doing right now, basically to think our task really through and what mechanism might be used, and whether they get away with a line of sight that might not result in a very complex representation of how they represent the world, but just basically, so what can they see or what they cannot see.
And I was wondering if this last condition about how will be perceived an object in terms of color, for example, could be linked to what they expect to see, to the belief condition, because it is not about location related to your body, but much more about how it will be imagined, perceived from the person.
Yeah, you would have to explain to me how you would manipulate a true versus a false belief. Because by the focus of our analysis on true beliefs, basically, we have the false beliefs, of course, in there. Otherwise, then it would become really very trivial. Suddenly, basically, if you only have true beliefs, then the participants would learn very quickly to take a shortcut. So in that sense, there might be an interesting manipulation there in terms of color. So I mean, at least this is visual perspective taking. Yeah. So this is so it goes a little bit away from the visual spatial, the left-right decision making. So you have to really sort of imagine how the object, which object, but also how it will appear. Yeah. From that particular perspective. So and you can't get away. So respondents are measured by pressing the space bar when they imagine the answer, and they can't press it immediately, because then the task will become very, very complex. So it's best to keep the image on the screen, basically press the space bar, and to then decide, okay, which is the image that matches what I generated in my mind. So in that sense, I think this comes as close as basically trying to imagine the phenomenology of the other's perspective or belief as I personally have ever gotten. Let's leave it at that, basically. Yeah, I don't know how it ties in with the collective subconscious, basically, that Ian was talking about, but yeah. Well, Andy had a question. Sorry.
So I think you probably said this, Mike. It's like, firstly, why do you think you don't get the same effect at 0 degrees? And partly for me getting my head around it, also, what would you predict would happen if somebody came in while they were away and rotated the rabbit?
Is this still the same question?
And so the first question was simply why don't we get the effect at 0 degrees? The second one was if the false belief was not about changing an object, but the rotating of an object.
Yeah, that's we haven't done yet basically. So basically we would say like, okay, for now, the simplest explanation is that we will get the same result in a way that maps onto beliefs or perspectives. If we don't, very interesting, then we have to reconsider what it actually means. Yeah. For now, that would be my prediction for that particular case. The other question, basically, why not at 0 degrees? It's because it's really you can assume the perspective and the true belief of the other under your own egocentric one. It's absolutely identical with your perspective and your belief. So this is why we all predicted a priori, we pre-registered that hypothesis in the form that we're not sure whether we would get it or not, but we always said like, well, there could be an interaction rather than a main effect, and 90 degrees should be the condition we should be focusing on.
It's almost like there's no perspective taking. There's no perspective taking.
Well, it's zero. It's yeah. So we actually included self-judgments in one of the 3 experiments. So what we did is basically, this is the basic one, experiment 1, experiment 2. We included 2 more questions. It's like, what will you actually see? And the 4th one was, what did you initially see? Because it was 2 birds with 1 stone. One was basically something that Francois would like, basically, so including self-judgments. So we can show that we get the identical pattern on the other judgments. Yeah, so it doesn't change it at all to include self judgment versus other judgment. So it's not basically that you absorb the other into yourself or anything like that. The other thing is the 2 questions were sort of what did you what will you actually see? It's the current state of affairs. And then what did you initially see? It's a memory aspect, because we wanted to see whether this difference between perspectives and beliefs could be a memory check back. And paradoxically, that's the only thing that we didn't imagine happening was participants were consistently, so across all conditions, were faster at what did you initially see? So there's no memory effect. They anchor the whole trial to what they initially see. So they're faster on those compared to when you ask them what will you actually, yeah, so their current representation. So that was counterintuitive. So it seems to indicate a little bit on how they anchor, so how they actually memorize the sequence of events in a trial. So they don't update their representations as they go along. They anchor it to the initial scene, if you like, and basically just encode what is happening, and then update at the end when they know what the judgment is. So that seems to be happening. So it cannot be explained by memory effects, but there could be other explanations. So we're looking also at what forms of uncertainty might come in, representation uncertainty, or certainly skin. That would be interesting because it would still be social. So the character might be more uncertain under belief reasoning conditions, or the participants might be more uncertain. So processing uncertainty. So that's something we are looking at right now. I think I'm really running out of time. Prof is looking at me very angrily.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
Didn't you see my shot?
I mean, I cannot in good conscience. So, and Rupo will be next, but thanks a lot for the great job.
Thank you very much.